Okay, hi everyone again. It's Leslie, one of the leads for the Vancouver Tableau user group. And we're joined today, he will be jumping on shortly, Dimitri Anashin. He actually leads the Victoria Tableau user group and co-leads the Vancouver version with me. And it's great that we've got so many people able to attend these new virtual meetups. And what it's enabled us to do is actually combine our tags together. So we're reaching out to more members of the community and sharing the stories that we have across the community. So before we get started, I just got a little bit of housekeeping. So as you'll have noticed, we've shifted the times of our user group meetings to be more of a quick lunch and learn. We found that our attendees kind of struggled if we had a meetup kind of after hours. And so this just gives us an opportunity to grab everybody, at least on the West Coast, to grab a beverage, grab some lunch, and sit back and enjoy some Tableau content with the community. So we are recording this session today. Okay, so you'll get a copy of that after today's meetup. And also, if you have any questions, at the bottom of the Zoom windows here, there is a Q&A section. Now, if you do have any question for us, please do feel free to add them into the Q&A section, not the chat. And we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. If we can't throughout the meetup, what we will do is we'll grab all of those questions and we'll send out the answers, the Q&A, in a little document to everyone who attended. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over now to our first presenter. So we have Scott Laming here, and he's from A-Books. It's an Amazon company, and he's going to show us or share with us how they've built their self-serve BI platform over there with A-Books. And then following on from Scott, we'll have Josh. Now Josh is actually on the East Coast, so he's probably had his lunch already, and he's a lead solutions engineer with Tableau out there. And in timing for what's going on right now in the world, he's got a great presentation to show us what we can do on Tableau for contact tracing. So I'm not going to spoil anything on that. So we'll have that coming up in the second half. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Scott, who's going to share his presentation. Thanks, Scott.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. So yeah, I'm Scott. I'm in Victoria, and I was just going to share. It's less about exactly using Tableau, but more how we implemented Tableau as part of our self-serve BI solution, and how it really helped us as a small internet company. So small bit about me. I like doing a bunch of things that you might expect from just looking at me, what I would be into, because I'm kind of a walking stereotype that way. And as far as a data user, a data consumer, I actually started my career at A-Books in PR, and then worked through several different marketing roles before getting into report design, and then now actually sort of BI infrastructure as a BIE. I work for A-Books, which, as we said, it was an early internet company founded in 1995 in Victoria by a couple who were a used bookseller and a government IT worker. And their whole goal was to try and see if they could sell books on the internet, which turned out to be a very lucrative thing to do over the years. In 2008, Amazon bought A-Books. And because we focus on rare, out of print, hard to find things, whereas Amazon is particularly good at selling fungible products to people, so we're a little bit different in what we're doing. We have two locations, one here in Victoria and one in Munich. for offices, and we have millions and millions and millions of products on AbeBooks, which I'll explain in just a second here. And also we're hiring an SEO specialist right now, as well as a couple SDE roles and a marketing manager. So if anyone has any interest in living and working on the island, ping me and I'll tell you a bit more about that. So millions of products, that's sort of the first thing people ask is, what do you mean? And this is sort of the crux of why Tableau is a big solution for us, is that we have tons of data. I mean, everyone has tons of data, but we have these sort of two main problems, one that's pretty standard and one that's special to us. Because books are a long tail item to begin with, and then we have the longest of the long tails as far as what we serve. If you take a look here, we're talking about Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, a classic book, classic from 1850 or 43. If you look on the left, this is an item that was listed on AbeBooks, was a first edition of this book from 1943 or 1843. It's signed, leather bound. It was selling for $20,000. On the left, you have, or sorry, on the right, you have a POD copy, which was selling for about $3. Depending on what the customer is looking for, we serve both those cases as well as hundreds in between for that one title. And so because of this, we treat each book that gets listed as a separate unique listing, because depending on what you're interested in as a collector of books or manuscripts and things, then you're going to have a very what you're looking for is going to differ very differently, even if you're looking for the same title as someone else. The other problem we have for our data and the size of our data is the sort of standard that most companies would have if they're looking to sell worldwide on the internet, especially an old company, you know, where we've been around for over 20 years. We have lots of different integrations with lots of different third parties, and we sell in multiple languages, and all of those data problems come together for how we need to solve our business problems. We started by this sort of a major, we built a DW, and we import all the files from all the different third parties that we interact with and from our sales and inventory pipelines, and we put them into the data warehouse and crunch them together, and we were putting together ad hoc SQL and Crystal reports in Excel, and our marketers would spend an entire day on Monday putting together reports. They would have like an Excel file that literally said like, oh, run this and then go get a cup of coffee from down the street because it's going to take 20 minutes for this to run. It was brittle, it was awful, and everyone wanted a change. It created this vicious reporting cycle where we'd have fragmented data, and people would generate reports in the different services that we had. Those reports would be slightly different than each other. So then, you know, senior managers would be asking like, well, how does this report relate to this report? So someone would end up creating some ad hoc query, which would end up, you know, answering that question, but creating two more, which would then create another deep dive request. And it would just sort of spending more time trying to chase your tail than actually getting to the meat of what the actual business problems were. In and around this time, we did launch Tableau Server, but I wanted to sort of show that the people were realized that the answers were available to them. Like, you know, you can see these. This is a survey we did to our business users. People saw that we had this information in our DW. They knew it was available to them, but they didn't know how to get at it, and that this burden of you know, being a BI expert was started being pushed onto all of our business users, and it was slowing us down. So we were looking for how we could really scale up and probably solve a solution, which is where we came to Tableau, and where we found that this has really helped us. We launched Tableau Server, and we started putting generating all of these baked reports and these Excel reports into data sources, and really started to onboard all of our business users with Tableau Server licenses, and getting them to create their own reports. And this was really empowering for our business users to be able to actually go in and kind of poke around and solve their own things. We were able to refresh our own extracts. Business users were creating their own vizzes. we were starting to solve a lot of problems, but as I'm sure any of you have started to try and once you solve one problem, you kind of open up a couple more. And this was that everyone wanted more data on top of it. They're like, well, this is great. Like you've answered a huge swath of my problems, and I've gotten my stuff quicker. Well, like let's get more, and I can answer answer more problems. They also wanted to cut things more ways, which started to give us lag uh, on our extracts. Also, we realized that some of the ways that we had implemented our solutions on Tableau Server was actually causing sort of brittle reporting. So we had large like traffic and sales data sets, and we were trying to blend them together, which was sort of reducing the trust for our users. They weren't really realizing all the relationships between the data in our different data sets, which was causing them to think that everything was broken. And then it was actually these initial gains we had where everyone was starting to build viz and answering their own problems. We were having it fall back, and the users were being concerned about creating reports because they thought they would break stuff. So we needed to come up with a way to solve this problem, and we realized we needed some sort of like a prep layer. And interesting, this was actually before Tableau created Tableau Prep, but that actually really does solve a lot of the problems that you can do there. But we didn't. We're trying to figure out how to solve that. And then the last problem was that our Tableau server was sort of on its own island. So if we had any ETL failures leading up to this, we would end up creating these extract refreshes with broken data, and our users didn't realize that this was broken because they weren't on the BI team, they weren't on the DBA team. And so we needed to figure out a way to try and sort of stop the refreshes from happening so that people didn't have bad data. If there was going to be bad data, they were going to get no data. And that was the other sort of the problem that we had to solve. And we did figure out some interesting ways to do that. The way we did this is coming up with, we used a GUI ETL tool called Matillion. There's a whole bunch of other out there like Pentaho or Talmud, or there's a million you can choose from. We chose Matillion, and Tableau Prep could also work a lot for parts of this as well. But really, we wanted to find a way to orchestrate all of our data ETLs and our publishing of our extracts so that we could control the flow of this data, and also take some of that burden of these LOD calculations and aggregations out of the Tableau engine, which would allow us to increase the amount of data that we were putting into Tableau without crushing our server, as it were. And this has worked really, really well. For the aggregation steps, we would start to do things where this original report that I had, which was a blended traffic and sales report that was really finicky, and it would take, like an hour or more to refresh the extract in Tableau. I put together, and again, similar how you would do it with Tableau Prep, I used Matillion, and I was able to layer the report so that I've got my traffic and my sales all together in one data source. Did all of the year-on-year calculations in the same row to reduce my row count and get it down so that my users, and it was so that they were able to then play around with the report without it breaking. So they would still see values or not see values, but nothing that would appear broken, so that we are again able to give them that trust to empower them to be able to start doing and building their own reports without worrying about breaking anything, and also to get the large quantities of data and the insights that they wanted. The other thing that we managed to do is sort of figure out a way to set up our ETL so that when it broke, that it wouldn't kick off our extract. So we're able to use tab CMD to publish refreshes. So like once our base tables, our prep tables were loaded, that would kick off the extract refresh. Once the extract refreshes were sorted, we used we were able to then generate PDFs for our weekly business reviews, and have those all set up so that it was this chain that everyone was able to realize, like, oh, if something doesn't show up, then and also started using we call it chime, but SNS notification around when these different steps were completed or not completed. So again, our users would know, if they don't see anything, they would know that someone else was notified about it, and give us this full end-to-end idea of what's happening. And that's why I say we now have happy, or at least informed, business users at first thing on Monday when they roll in. So if they still don't see their data refreshed, they know that someone's working on it, or what's exactly gone wrong and happened. Our key learnings out of all of this were that if our users didn't trust that the data was populating, or didn't understand why something wasn't happening, they weren't going in and creating their own viz, and they weren't creating their own reports, and they weren't trusting the reports that we do. And they kept asking for more deep dive requests of, well, why does this look like that? Why does that look like that? And so once you're able to sort of like give them a little bit more insight into why things were working and not working, they were more trusting of the whole platform. Is so no one uses slow reports, which again I think is probably like pretty obvious for most of you guys. By putting all this our stuff into our data into aggregating into a prep layer, we were able to speed up our extracts and speed up our live connections to our data warehouse, which would make it so that people can comb through these vast quantities of hundreds of millions of rows and produce reports that actually generate their results pretty quickly. And so again, happier to keep using the tool. And again, we created a hierarchy of users for server. So like we've got DBAs, who of course like manage our databases. We created this like BI champions role. So this is like business analysts to sort of handle the creation of extracts and vetting the data that goes on to server. And then beyond that, like on each team, we'll have 3 or 4 people who have a Tableau desktop license, so that they can actually groom and create reports, or help the rest of the users with their general server licenses, where they can edit and create their own workbooks based on the data sources that we've got. Doing this, we've managed to have, so AbeBooks is a company of about 120 people. We have 2 DBAs and 3 BI champions, and then probably a dozen desktop users, which sort of like flows out that request without having anyone become a major bottleneck in this self-service BI platform. And then the last one is just really leveraging that sort of 80-20 rule, which is like, can we answer 80% of the questions with 20% of the effort? And then if we're not answering that sort of that level, then only then creating new data sources to try and keep that sort of lean as possible. And it also reduces the number of ad hoc requests, and sort of speeding this up for the speed at which we can answer our questions. And then that brings me to, we redid this BIDW survey with basically the same questions a couple, 3 years later. And after implementing sort of both this prep layer and a fully functioning Tableau server, we've managed to make massive headway in the in how people view BI services at our company. And we've gone from sort of barely passing or being a little bit worse than average on sort of a 5-point scale, to we're at least meeting or beating sort of a 3 out of 5, which I'd say is, like, in my mind, a pass. So we still got some work to do, and the places where we're not doing as well, we're still not as well. So I mean, like business glossary, we can still make a lot of headway there. but it's definitely our users are having a lot more faith and finding it easier to navigate our complicated logic. I feel like I went through that pretty quick. I did have to ask for questions, so I wasn't sure if Liz and folks wanted me to do questions now or at the end.
Hi Scott, it's Liz. So yeah, we have a question that's just come in from Bart. If you wanted to open up the Q&A panel window there.
How did you get your non-data trained people up to speed with the structure of the data? There are many trainings for Tableau, but each of them has its own peculiarities. So yeah, I actually wrote a series of sort of trainings on my own, kind of went through and one using Tableau for some Tableau training and sort of highlighted a couple of basics. And then two kind of did the same sort of thing on my own to maybe not to the same extent, but to try and explain how our data structures worked similarly. So I did it using a combination of SQL and Tableau to trying to sort of introduce people to, like, I'd say, hey, here's a W3 schools or something for SQL, and here's the Tableau trainings that Tableau offers. Go through those, check those out, and then I would give a series of like questions that I had created around our data structures as well, and kind of walked people through the basics of our data structures as for every new hire that comes on. So I've got sort of three courses, like a beginner, intermediate, like SQL, which kind of walks them through data structures, and then one thing just on peculiarities of our business logic, and then a basic series of trainings that they would want to follow on Tableau itself. Does that answer the question? I think so. I see it is answered. Anything else, anybody? How did you refresh extracts after the data is loaded in SQL DW? So in Matillion, we've basically got, I'll run a check for when the table is uploaded, and then use tab CMD to refresh the data extract. So it's, if you look up, tab CMD is of course the Tableau command line tool. And then we just built that into the script of the ETL to do that. We originally did it on a Windows server and just had it scheduled, but that causes the problem where it can sometimes, it's like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. I'm gonna fire off the scheduled refresh. So if you use tab CMD, then you can really put those in command. Great. So it's a combination. Yes, exactly. Tab CMD and SQL. Couple of questions on Tableau Server. Do you provide on Tableau Server, do you provide users with edit permissions? And on the business glossary, any thoughts on tools for approaching what you were considering? So for sorry, things are popping up and down. Yes, I offer, so we do with permissions. I use the projects. So I will give, like, I work in the marketing department, and we have three different teams in the marketing department. So between workbooks, folders, and projects, I'll sort of manage who gets edit and write capability on server. Again, we're a pretty flat org, so we just sort of we trust people in that, but like definitely you can set that up however you like. And the same thing, like you can set it so that only the owner of the workbook or the owner of the project can edit or save as. I personally actually think that the Tableau permission structure is almost overly complicated for my use case, but I'm sure that are there others who will find it just perfect, that it can be as precise as you need it to be. But yeah, it's your mileage may vary on that.
Well,
Cool.
that was
It
great.
says it's answered, so I think that is.
Yeah, gonna say thanks, Scott. That looks like we have everything answered. If you do have some more questions, please feel free to pop them in the question and answers box, and we'll get to them after the session today. And it looks like Josh is raring to go. He's already shared his screen. So Josh, away you go. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Scott, that was a great presentation. I just realized that I actually picked up a rare Isaac Asimov book from a book. So that's really cool to see that you guys are Tableau users. It is also great to be in Vancouver virtually today. I'm actually coming out of Ottawa, and I will be chatting with you guys about automating network analysis for contact tracing using TabPy. Don't worry if you haven't used TabPy before. Don't worry if network analysis sounds foreign. We'll talk about it. This is really for an audience across the board. And so just so you guys get an idea of who you're talking to, you can just picture someone on the other line right now with a baseball cap covering up his COVID haircut. But I'm a lead solutions engineer. I'm based out of Ottawa, and I've been working with Maggie Morrison, who's the strategic account executive in Vancouver, which is why I am joining the Vancouver call today. I also have a background in public health, specifically in pandemic preparedness, which has unfortunately become a little bit more relevant. But in addition to that as well, too, I did my master's in intelligence analysis. And I also worked as a security contractor, basically implementing a large-scale analytics platform in the government of Canada for about three and a half years. So when I was working with my team, I actually ran my own team of analysts. We specialized in network analysis. And so when I talk about network analysis, I'm not talking about those little kind of networks that you typically see. We really specialize in large-scale network analysis. And the network that you're looking at right now has about 17,000 nodes in it. This was really small compared to what we normally dealt with. We would deal with networks of up to 800,000 to 1.2 million nodes, where my team would basically get a question that would relate to Syria, Ukraine, ISIS, Iran, Venezuela, areas around the world that had a few challenges. And what you're looking at right now is a network where it's been broken up into its communities. And you can even see here in the middle, a few of the nodes are actually being sized based on some network stats that are in there. And I'll get to that more in a bit. But there's obviously a major cognitive load on people to be able to work through that. And I had a very non-technical team as well, too. A lot of people have subject matter expertise in their area, but not necessarily expertise in data and analysis. And so traditional linked node analysis, and for those who are in the public health sphere, you might be using Nero. This might be very familiar. The major challenge is if I have anything above 500 nodes, it gets really difficult to understand without specialized training. And not only that, the second part to all of this is when I have anything above 10,000 nodes, generally for a lot of these products, especially where they're dynamic, it becomes really difficult to be able to work through. And then the third part is what am I looking at? What do I want to focus on? Do I focus here because there are a whole bunch of edges going in, all these little lines? Is that what's really important? I don't really have, and if I flip back here, any context, what my communities are, why a node might be important. So it's pretty challenging. And you have to have a really specific question to insert yourself versus something like Tableau that actually allows us to explore the data on a large scale. And so what you guys are looking at right now is the actual process that my team would walk through. It's still really kind of cutting edge, I suppose, about 8 years on. But basically what it is they're using a principle called data segmentation. We're using the communities that are automatically detected through machine learning. And anecdotally, I can say it's very accurate. And through a whole bunch of testing, community detection is, this is one of the third most accurate algorithms that you're looking at. So it's pretty spot on, generally speaking. And they're looking to figure out who's in that community. And what are they saying? And this is really the data that would come out the other side, and it's social media data. And the challenge is that you have tables that are millions of different records long, and you're trying to ask someone in about 3 days to come up with an answer as to what's going on in a certain part of the world simply by going through these giant spreadsheets. Well, not super effective, still pretty effective, especially given the task I had given my team. I was basically giving my team a series of coordinates and asking them to plot me from point A to point B. Well, that's pretty difficult. You know, they would find their way there, and maybe it wasn't the best route, but we'd still have an answer. So when I introduced Tableau into our workflow, our time on task dropped by 75%. It was like I had just provided the team with a map to their data. And what they were able to do was start providing a more nuanced approach to their analysis. So their assessments went up in terms of their accuracy and what they could predict. Not only that, their ability to automatically corroborate data on the back end, to have that confidence in what they were saying, really began to come through. So we could say with a degree of certainty what we're looking at. But really more importantly was for data-driven decision makers, just decision makers in general, what would happen is we could actually come back and say, not only are we giving you an answer, but we're going to provide you with multiple different routes you can take in the future. And so it completely transformed what we're doing down from a 3-day process down into a single day. And so we're obviously not here to talk about intelligence today. That's just kind of the starting point. And at its core, you can use network analysis for anything with health, where what we'll talk about today with, you have a suspected COVID case and contacts. With banking, you have the person with money, the person receiving money. Cyber, a device sends a packet, a device receives a packet. Telcos, a call is made and someone receives that call. Organizational efficiency, there are units dedicated to that where you can take emails, figure out what's happening, look at logistics supply lines. So a ton of different applications. And actually, it's really simple. All you need is what's called a source and a target. You need 2 columns, and exactly what I just described right there. So let's sink our teeth into a very real case. In South Korea, there is what's known as patient 31 now, 61-year-old woman who was a parishioner at the Shinjeoni church, and she was one of the early COVID cases in South Korea. Well, if we put on our old hat and we look at this from Lincoln node analysis, well, yeah, patient 31, look at that, a whole bunch of nodes. Yeah, we should look at this person, maybe this person, and how about that one? Okay, that's all very reasonable at this scale when you're this early on with the number of cases that you have. But I'm also looking at this too and saying, there's a data collection issue. Someone who's hyper-connected, another person who's hyper-connected, and they have no overlap in network, something's wrong. That said, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the problem here is that from upstream public health intervention, which means you're getting in there and stopping it as soon as possible, was that there was misinformation and disinformation, which is a major challenge that we have on social media right now and is contributing to the pandemic, that they thought salt water could be sprayed in people's mouths and you would be cured. Wow, amazing. Only problem is they put the nozzle too deep in and spread COVID among several different parishioners. In fact, that initial case was so prolific, it was responsible for over half the cases at around the 9,000 mark. So you can really see how if you're able to intervene soonest, which is one of the most important factors with containing a pandemic, you can really change things. And so when we look at these 9,000 cases solely in nodes, and I know they're not really laid out for visualization, but it gets really difficult to figure out who the provenance source is. Now, 9,000 cases, I'm sure a lot of people in public health wish they only had 9,000 cases in a lot of different health regions. But if you start working your way back through and taking a look here, you can do it using a Lincoln node approach, but it's very difficult to achieve that. And what happens if you end up with patient 31 at 9,000 cases? What about if you have them at 1 million cases? If you have 1 million cases, and the average American, which I'll use for our purposes today, has about 600 people in their network, 15 to 25 of who are close, and let's just ballpark it around 20 million cases. Back to the napkin math, there's some overlap in the network. You have around 12 million to 15 million nodes, and that's only to the first degree. Like, we're not even making our way close to Kevin Bacon at this point. We're still pretty early on in that process. So again, easy to find here, but this isn't the world we live in. it is very difficult when we start dealing with the number of cases that we have with COVID. And so when I talk to people in public health, it's like a torrent of data has just washed over everyone. This is actually a syphilis network. So for pretty obvious reasons, the R0, so the ability for it to spread, is kind of limited. It's an STD. Small network, small group, even if you're looking at like cholera outbreaks that trace back to black water sites and things like that, it's manageable at this scale. But when you see a real COVID network, which is exactly what you're looking at right now, all of a sudden, where do I focus? Again, that problem. Do I focus here? And I even have my nodes being sized differently. This is a byproduct of the prep flow I'm about to show you guys. But okay, I can focus in here, and we still have the same problem as well too. I will implore people in public health, and this is kind of maybe my own personal PSA, start thinking about different approaches that are sustainable to your data collection mechanisms. Surveys suffer from data quality issues. And how do I know this is Joe Smith, Jane Doe, and Jane Doe? I don't. Think about phone numbers. Phone numbers are very important to resolve entities, and it's also likely going to reduce the load. And that way you can really direct people away from data collection to actual analysis. So this network here is large. We're talking about 30,000 individuals in this network alone. And so what does that actually look like when we start to visualize it and understand it? Well, I'm going to hop into TabPy today. Anyone who wants to get the service up and running, it takes a single install command. You might need someone who's a little bit more adept with Python, but a lot of people are able to script even without that. And so the main part here to take away is that Tableau can plug into advanced analysis, things like R, things like Python, and we can run machine learning and models and AI to our heart's content in those different tools and produce a lot of predictability. But so what? What does it matter if a decision maker can't look at a model and understand predictability? That was the exact issue that I ended up encountering on one of my previous projects. Was we have this model showing predictability. How do we get people to interpret it and understand it? So I'm actually going to show you guys what that window looks like, and Tableau offers that window into advanced analytics. So we can take something like a color and just understand quickly so we can operationalize it. And that way people can actually make decisions a lot faster. So what you're looking at right now is Tableau Prep. For those who are unfamiliar with it, it is an ETL tool. So a nice way of saying it grabs data, it does something to the data. In this case, it's enriching the data, but it can clean it, standardize it, and then it shoots it out the other end. It can go to your server, it can go locally. But the data that we're looking at is, it's really case in contact, so a suspected COVID case in contact. You're not really looking at real data, but a network for all intents and purposes of what case data looks like. So think you have case management. And here we have our source and we have our target. Remember, the person who makes a call, the person who receives a call. This framework that I'm using right now applies to all of that. So I'm taking my data and I'm pulling that out. And then what I'm doing is I'm cleansing the data, because as you can imagine, there are a lot of issues with the data quality itself. What does it look like? How do we get it in a format where everything is going to blend together? But at the end of the day, I just pick two columns, source and a target, and then this little script icon, and you just saw it right there, is where Tableau grabs the data, Python processes it, and then enriches the data. So with a lot of the issues or a lot of the stats I was talking about with communities, the different colors that you're seeing, well, I have my communities right here. There we go. I have my largest communities. I have my largest communities, and I also have my measures. So this measure here that we're looking at tells me people who are in behind the scenes, really important, but maybe not celebrities. So think Dick Cheney to George Bush. Traditionally not really a celebrity, but holds a lot of power. They're called gray cardinals. That's something that network analysis looks at. This is your community bridge. Someone who may not be really important celebrity-wise, but connects two communities together. This has actually been denoted really importantly as helping to prevent the spread of COVID, or at least, sorry, communicable diseases, specifically flu in some of the research articles, as being one of the major things to look into. And then, of course, I have my communities. And I'm going to show you guys how this all comes together here in a second. But another thing to think about is, anyone, I hope you guys use Google. I get the people who use DuckDuckGo. That's a completely different reason. But please tell me you're using Google for your searches, just because it does a really good job. And that's you using network analysis every day. There's something called PageRank that sometimes I include in here that ranks the pages that you're looking at from Google. And all Google does is it provides you with the most important page first. And in this case, what we're doing is we're providing a Google list of everyone who needs to be contacted. So depending on their exposure to individuals with COVID and their placement within the network, it actually tells you, okay, I have my patients here, I have my contacts here, let's have the COVID status on, bring that data together, and now I actually have the ability to tap in to those individuals and see who's there. The other cool part is when we want to add in additional data, is that we can just grab some of the data that we have. Do I want to add in badge swipes from a building that I have? Do I want to throw in, I don't know, the email invites to meetings where I have a positive outbreak? So I'm thinking more government and facilities, controlling from that standpoint. Or do I want to take comorbidity with some of the items that I already had? Or you could take a phone bill, and that is actually going to provide you with one of the best networks, because people forget and people kind of fudge the truth on occasion. And this is a way to think about doing that. And so in doing all of these things is, well, I can just bring my data in, I can start resolving it together right here, do my join, and then automatically, I have my outputs and all that sort of stuff. So what's happening here is, and you just saw this is taking place, it's cached. It normally takes about 30 seconds, but it's created a network, it's outputted a file, and this is what we're looking at. So I've made this for more of an American audience, but this is Washington, D.C., and same thing still holds true, is if I have people on a contact tracing team, they need to be able to prioritize. So they can pick up the phone and call those people so we don't end up with a patient 31. The faster you get there, the sooner the fire goes out, the less damage is done, the more lives are saved. And here's the thing, is any of my teams that I had, I could give them, and you're going to see, I love my bar charts. There's a reason for that. It's because data literacy amongst a general audience it's much easier for people to understand bar charts, line charts, pie charts. Bar charts are great because I can sort them, I can color them, and I can size them, and people get it. So what I'm looking at here is I need to contact this individual. I need to reach on out and see who they are, what they're about. Now I can go on over to my case management tool, see who it is, see where they're located in this case, based on some of the information I have. And what I'm going to do here is I can now systematically work through, and it's going to tell me my priority. And if I look over here too, I now have my communities. So I can group people together and say, is there any relationship between this community that I have? Well, all these people are co-located here. That means chances are they could have been in the same building, could have been a mass gathering. And in a case like this, if I flip over to this community, well, they're fairly dispersed. Okay, well, they may have come together just like we saw with patient 31 and then redispersed across, or there happens to be a common element that we haven't quite identified at this point in time. So now I can tell my case manager, go through, assign all the cases that I have here, so we can start determining the why. Because if I just start randomly assigning people, it's going to lose the context of who I'm focusing on. And the most important thing here is this Tableau prep flow that I have, I can continually run it every half an hour, and this list ends up updating. So here we have the well-connected people, but this is the betweenness that I was talking about beforehand. And so if I focus on down, I have my community here. And actually here, let's see if I can just show you guys something here really quick. Is I've added an extension in here. And what the extension does is it visualizes the networks that I do have. So right now it's rendering and it's loading up the entire network that I have, but let's see if it kind of updates and renders. Regardless, it is one of those really big networks. So if I click here on that group again, all of a sudden what happens is, remember how I said you want to have a network that is easy to understand? Network diagrams serve a purpose, but you have to keep them consumable. And so people can, it'll add context to what people are looking at. And so here, because I've now automatically segmented my data, network analysis now becomes consumable within about half an hour of training. The beautiful part here is now too, is I can click on in, I can go on down, I can say, you know what, I'm going to look at this individual, I'm going to email them directly out of Tableau, I can create a URL action. The entire dashboard that you guys are looking at, I actually created half an hour before an event, or sorry, a morning before an event. And so what I did was I just took the data that I run through, and the beautiful part is I can just reconnect whatever data it is that I want. And as long as I just set a source and a target, I can reuse the same structure for my dashboard into the future. So there's a lot of reusability. It now becomes actionable. And there's one last really cool thing I want to show you guys is, and let's see, do I have it in here? Let me just take a quick look and see if I can pull up my data that I should have here. And so the important thing is that I can also click on some of the communities that I have. And so what I can do is I can have a better understanding of what that network or what that community is made up of. So the way to think about this is, if I have my communities that are right over here, and I begin to include additional metadata like comorbidity, issues like that, what ends up happening is I actually have the ability at that point, and you know what, I'm just going to go in here and show it with you guys to show you how flexible this is. I can actually go and take a look at these communities and see a fingerprint for each one. And so what that means is, what if I have certain overlapping factors or issues? What if I have an at-risk community where their age is a major factor? Well, if I use explain data with this, and I wish I had this with my team back in like 2012, the way to think about it is data is really good at the who, what, when, where, and the how. Humans, we still own the why, but augmented intelligence will help us get that much quicker to what it is we need to really kind of look at. So it'll shorten the number of hypotheses that we have to work through. And so if you just give me 1 second here, I am literally opening up some raw data just so I can quickly demonstrate this to you. And here we go. So what I've done is I've now brought in the same data at the end of our network. We're connected live right now. And what I want to do is I'm going to, don't pay too much attention to this part here. I'm taking what's called my modularity class. I'm adding it on over here. And then what I'm also going to do is take each one of my given nodes that I have here. And so let's go in and take a look at the count. And now what I'm able to do is I now have the size of my communities. Well, remember that top one that we had? I'm going to hit explain data. And so what's going to happen here is it's going to run through, and guess what? It's now identified that there's a central area to look at. And not only that, that the eccentricity that I have within the network is far off. So this is actually an outlier according to one of my stats. So imagine what could be possible if you combine this with all sorts of additional health data. And you could quickly, within minutes, work your way through, contact the people who need to be contacted. And in doing so, it's actually scalable. This is something that you can put in the hands of a lot of people and they can quickly work through. So instead of throwing more people at the issue, you just throw a different approach at it so people can get to what they need. We'll probably have some follow-up questions right now. And if you guys are interested in hearing more, just feel free to reach out to Maggie Morrison and we can chat a little bit more directly if needed. I'll pass it back over.
Thanks, Josh. That was incredible. I've never seen data like that myself personally, being in finance and banking. So quite an eye-opener as well. So we do have a question in the Q&A, and please, everyone who's on the call today, please feel free to jump in there and put your questions in. So we have one here. We have a couple actually. If you can open up the window there, Josh.
Yeah, so I see, how is the network graph created in Tableau? Yeah, so basically what's happening is, and I'll see if I can kind of just flip over one of the pieces here. I won't go into showing too much of the script right now, just because like there is a certain degree of sensitivity around it, right? Because a lot of people can use something like this, which is why I say just reach out directly and we can talk some more candidly. But what's happening is, we're taking, and I'll even show you what some of this data looks like here. We're taking some basic data that contains and sorry, I'm just trying to multitask here, where we have that patient contact list that happens to be here. This is essentially it. Like, you don't even need that portion. So we're taking these, which happens to be a single case with 5 different contacts. And so I'm using Python in background to stitch those together to create a network using NetworkX. And so what happens is I just get it to enrich the network. I say, I want this stat, I want this stat, I want this stat. And then I'm telling it to give it back to me in prep, where it uses what's called the data frame. And a data frame is a fancy way of saying a table. So the data frame looks like this. Here I can see some of the contacts. And so it'll produce exactly this data frame right here. So it's handing me back each one of these pieces as I tell it to. And then I can take the data, stitch it back together and do what's needed. I'll pop on to the next question. Okay, any best practice tips for visualize and map for more complicated relationships just beyond first order? Yeah, so this is where it can get more complicated, but also really powerful. Is here I have my source and my target. What if I started to grab a phone number, a first name, and create what are called compound keys? I can create the compound keys, and so I can create networks of any kind. Not only that, I can actually create a specific relationship type. So that means I can create networks of all sorts of different types, stitch those back together, and have a pretty nuanced idea of what's taking place in the networks. That said, you have to be careful of how crazy you're going to go, because at the end of the day, network is just a representation of a series of relationships, right? It's how we want to kind of interpret the world. It's never going to be perfect, and really there's likely no such thing as perfect or the truth of what it is. But in doing so, just remember that the stats that you have are going to be reflective of the data. So the sample you start off with and how you represent those relationships are going to be instrumental in all of that. And if you are using Python, it's called a multi-edge network. So if I go and I look at the social media stuff that I do, you can actually have multiple different edges that will have a different tweet for each edge. So that line between the two nodes, that's what that is. For those of you who don't get it, that's just me going a little bit deeper, so don't worry. You can still accomplish all this just with the basic source and target. All right, is there any online description for this project? No, there is not. I am currently, I suppose, the repository of information around this. I do have a team that I do work with, but by and far, I'm kind of the main person, the go-to person. We're validating this technique with different health authorities right now, one in particular. So if anyone is part of a health authority and want to validate this, or if you guys are interested in network analysis, even thinking like banking just got brought up, this is really a great way to detect fraud. There are multiple different approaches. Feel free to reach on out and we can talk some more. Oh, more questions. Okay, keep scrolling down. I like this. I normally don't get this many questions about the presentation, so thanks. Have you found any good ways to visualize network node data in Tableau? Yes, there is. It's something that I'm working on right now, where I can take a visualization algorithm, output that. It gives me my coordinates for each one of the nodes. And then what I can do is I just use a path line in between those, and it'll actually render it. It's static, but it still provides you with a lot of context, especially when you end up clicking on any of the pieces. By the way, the new logical object model that does one-to-many and many-to-many relationships has a ton of applicability in this area. So I'm really glad to see that Tableau is an early adopter of moving into like semi-structured data and JSON and just allowing the flexibility to work with that stuff on the back end. I wonder if the workshop recording is recording. If so, where can I find it? The coordinators are going to pass it along after the session. Is it possible to create a network graph with version 2019.1? Yes, fairly, let me say maybe. I can't remember if Python came into effect in 2019.2 in prep or 2019.1, but all you need is the Python connection right here. So I do know I did start doing this in 2019.2. So I'll have to look into that and get back to you on that one. But all you need is this network, is the Python connector for it. Oh, look at that, and on time. One last question. Do you need a virtual machine to host TapPy? Nope, I have it running on my i5 locally right now, and it's processing all the results. Great, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for everyone for sending in your questions. If you have any further questions, like Josh mentioned, for him, if you want to reach out to Maggie and we can connect you directly, or you can connect to us, the leaders, and we'll get you connected to answer any further questions. So thank you very much, everyone. All right, so this session has been recorded. It will be sent out at the end once we get it downloaded, and we'll also be sending out a quick survey as well to all that has attended to just to help us make these sessions a little bit better for you guys. Okay, so without further ado, I want to bid you a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.